when 16-year-old Amelia Carter rolled her wheelchair to the microphone during Willow Glen High School's career day. The room barely stirred until she said 5 words that made everyone stop breathing. "I want to be a pilot." Captain Douglas Hayes, a visiting military officer, chuckled dismissively. "Flying planes, young lady. Some dreams are just too dangerous for people like you." Laughter rippled. Teachers looked away. And Amelia, she simply stared straight ahead, undeterred. What no one in that room realized, not Captain Hayes, not her classmates, not even her mother, was that this so-called disabled girl was about to turn that humiliating moment into something extraordinary. Because just weeks later, when a family became trapped in a raging wildfire and all the trained rescue pilots refused to fly, Amelia did. But first, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our amazing community from around the world. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. The wind swept gently across the open plains of Willow Glen, Montana, where wheat fields stretched to the horizon and small plains occasionally traced quiet arcs across the sky. It was a place where dreams felt too big for the land that held them. But for Amelia Carter, a 16-year-old girl bound to a wheelchair since early childhood, the sky wasn't just a canvas, it was a calling. Born with cerebral palsy, Amelia had spent her life being told what she couldn't do. Teachers lowered expectations, strangers offered pity. And when she dared to whisper her dream, "I want to be a pilot," people laughed. Not out of cruelty, but disbelief. Because what kind of disabled girl dreams of flying? But Amelia never saw her wheelchair as a limitation. While other teens were busy with parties or sports, she was devouring aviation manuals, learning flight theory, and practicing simulations late into the night. "It's not about my legs," she would say. "It's about my mind, and that still works just fine." In a town too small for big dreams, Amelia's determination was already rewriting what people thought was possible. The sky was calling, and she was ready to prove them wrong. It was Career Exploration Day at Willow Glen High School, and the gymnasium buzzed with polite anticipation. Folding chairs lined the polished wood floor, a makeshift stage stood at the front, and a banner reading "Soar Toward Your Future" hung proudly above the podium. Students filed in, many yawning, others scrolling on their phones. But in the front row, Amelia Carter sat straight in her chair, her hands gripping the rims of her wheelchair with quiet determination. Today was her moment. Amelia had spent weeks preparing her short presentation, while others were sharing about nursing, law enforcement, or farming. She was about to do something different, bold, uncomfortable, perhaps, but necessary. Her dream, after all, wasn't one people took seriously. "I want to be a pilot," she had said many times before, only to receive raised eyebrows, awkward silences, or worse, laughter. But today, she wasn't asking for permission. She was standing in truth. The principal introduced the keynote speaker, Captain Douglas Hayes, a decorated Air Force officer known for his discipline and bluntness. He walked onto the stage with the kind of rigid authority that silenced rooms without trying. He spoke about structure, sacrifice, and the importance of knowing your place in life. The students listened respectfully until Amelia raised her hand. "Sir," she began, voice steady, "I've been studying aviation for 2 years. I know flight theory, navigation, weather systems. I understand that military pilots have physical requirements. But are there paths for someone like me, someone in a wheelchair, to fly or serve in aviation?" There was a pause, long and uncomfortable. Captain Hayes looked at her, then down at the wheelchair. His expression tightened. "Flying isn't for everyone," he said sharply. "It's a dangerous profession, especially in combat. You need full physical capability, quick reflexes, strength, coordination. Some dreams," he added, "aren't realistic for people with certain limitations." Silence fell across the gym like a heavy curtain. A few students fidgeted. A teacher dropped her pen. Amelia didn't blink. "With respect, sir," she replied, her voice firm. Stephen Hawking couldn't walk, but he understood the universe. There are pilots with prosthetic limbs flying today. Why should a disability stop anyone from chasing their dream, especially if they're willing to work harder than anyone else? Gasps rippled through the room. The captain chuckled not kindly. "This isn't about dreams, young lady. It's about reality. And reality has rules." That was the moment everything shifted. A classmate filmed the exchange. Within 24 hours, the video had gone viral. Strangers from across the country watched a disabled girl get dismissed for daring to dream, and something in their hearts stirred. The internet didn't laugh. It rallied. Emails flooded in, former pilots wrote messages of encouragement, advocacy groups reached out, even a retired flight instructor from a nearby town, Franklin Moore, a Vietnam vet, called Amelia's mother and said, "That girl of yours, she's got the heart of a flyer. If she's serious, I'll teach her myself." Overnight, Amelia Carter went from that girl in a wheelchair to the girl who stood her ground in front of a decorated officer. Her dream to become a pilot, once laughed at, was now taking on a life of its own, not just for her, but for others who had been told no, for no good reason. She hadn't just asked a question that day. She had changed the conversation. 2 weeks after Amelia Carter's quiet rebellion stirred the internet, life in Willow Glen had begun to shift. The town's sleepy diner now buzzed with conversations about aviation laws, inclusion, and a certain 16-year-old girl whose spine was stronger than most people's resolve. Amelia had started private flight lessons with Franklin Moore, the retired veteran who had flown everything from supply runs in Vietnam to bush planes in Alaska. He didn't see a disabled girl. He saw a pilot in training. She studied relentlessly, mastering aerodynamics, weather systems, emergency procedures, all while navigating a world still skeptical of what she could do. But life, as it often does, tested her dream in an entirely different way. One dry October morning, smoke rose over the nearby Saddle Ridge Mountains. A wildfire had broken out after a lightning strike and due to unusually strong winds. It was spreading at an uncontrollable rate. News stations were calling it the worst fire the region had seen in years. At 6:42 a.m., Amelia and her mother, Charlotte, were awakened by the town's emergency sirens. At the local community hall, volunteers scrambled to coordinate support for displaced families. Charlotte was helping prepare meals. Amelia was monitoring weather apps and satellite maps from her tablet. That's when the call came in. A family of 4, the Morrisons, had gone camping near Echo Lake and were now trapped as fire consumed the only access road. Helicopters had been grounded. Visibility was poor. Wind conditions were unstable. The official report was blunt. No safe way in, no safe way out. Amelia stared at the topography map, her fingers trembling. There was a narrow window, maybe 35 minutes, where upper-level winds would calm just enough for a small aircraft to make it in and out if flown low. Fast and smart. It was a long shot. She called Franklin. "I've run the numbers," she told him. "If we take the Cessna 172, come in low from the west, and land near the ridge above Echo Lake, we could do it. We'd have just enough time to get them out." Franklin paused. He had flown hundreds of rescue missions in his lifetime, but never one with a 16-year-old disabled girl as his co-pilot. "That's borderline crazy," he muttered. "But not impossible," Amelia said. Franklin exhaled. "Meet me at the hangar." An hour later, local officials watched in stunned silence as the old Cessna lifted off the ground, cutting through haze and turbulence with a girl in the co-pilot seat who wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that sky. Not in that moment. Not in that life. She adjusted the radio, read coordinates aloud, calculated altitude changes in real time. This was no longer theory. It was survival. The girl they laughed at was now flying toward fire. On the ground, the Morrisons spotted the plane's silhouette through smoke. They waved frantically, hope flickering in their eyes. The landing was rough but controlled. Franklin kept the engine running while Amelia helped load the family, including a toddler and their dog, into the small aircraft. Time was evaporating like water on hot stone. Within minutes, they were airborne again. The return flight was brutal. Wind shear tossed the plane like a toy, but Amelia's voice remained calm. Stay above 5,200 feet. Drafts pulling harder from the south, adjust 5 degrees west. Franklin didn't argue. He just flew. 20 minutes later, they touched down back in Willow Glen to a crowd of emergency workers and reporters. The disabled girl who dreamed of flying had just helped save 4 lives. People didn't laugh anymore. They stood in awe. 3 days had passed since the rescue flight, but the town of Willow Glen was still talking about it. The story had already reached news outlets in Seattle, Denver, and even caught the attention of a national morning show. But inside Amelia Carter's modest home, the only thing that truly mattered was the quiet shift happening in people's hearts. At the community library, where Amelia used to spend lonely afternoons reading about flight mechanics and FAA regulations, things felt different now. People no longer saw a disabled girl in a wheelchair. They saw a young pilot who had risked her life to save others. Even Captain Douglas Hayes, the man whose words had once cut like a knife, had changed. He called the school principal personally. Then, to everyone's surprise, he asked to meet Amelia. They arranged it at the school auditorium, the very place where it had all started. Amelia wheeled herself into the room wearing a simple navy blue jacket and her pilot wings, gifted to her by Franklin Moore after the rescue. Captain Hayes stood at the podium, his military posture still rigid, but his voice carried something new, humility. 3 weeks ago, he began, I stood in this room and told a young woman that her dream wasn't realistic, that flying was a world she didn't belong in. I was wrong. The room was silent. I spoke from assumption. He continued, not experience. I thought I understood what makes a pilot, but now I know it's not muscle or height or perfect coordination. It's courage, clarity, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. He turned to Amelia. You did what I never could. You saw beyond fear. You flew straight into it. Tears welled up in the eyes of teachers, parents, and classmates. The inspirational story they had watched unfold online was now personal. It was local. It was real. After the short ceremony, Hayes approached her quietly. He extended a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of official Air Force wings. They're yours if you want them, he said. Amelia looked at the wings, then up at him. Thank you, she replied, but I think I'm better off earning my own. He smiled for the first time. It wasn't just Captain Hayes who had changed. At the diner where Amelia's mom worked, strangers left envelopes with notes like, for the girl who proved them wrong, for the one who reminds us the sky has no limits. Franklin's old hangar was now filled with volunteer mechanics eager to retrofit planes with adaptive controls. Aviation schools across the country reached out, asking how they could better include students with disabilities. One girl's dream had become a spark for change. Even Amelia's classmates began to see her differently. She wasn't just that girl in a wheelchair anymore. She was Amelia, the girl who flies. And perhaps the most heartwarming moment of all came when 8-year-old Ellie Montgomery, who also used a wheelchair, tugged on Amelia's sleeve after school one afternoon. My brother says I can't be a doctor because I can't walk fast, Ellie said. Amelia knelt beside her. Ellie, I flew a plane through a wildfire. Trust me, you can be anything. The smile on the little girl's face said it all. That moment, quiet and tender, wasn't trending on social media. But it was the kind of life-changing moment that lasts forever. The first snowfall dusted the edges of Willow Glen's airfield just a week after Amelia's rescue flight. The town had begun to settle back into its quiet rhythm. But for Amelia Carter, everything had changed, not in a flashy, headline-making way, but in small, steady shifts that felt deeper than applause. One morning, Amelia rolled into Franklin Moore's hangar, expecting another routine lesson. But something was different. Instead of the Cessna, there was a group of people waiting, some in business suits, others in flight jackets, all wearing expressions of quiet anticipation. At the center stood Sarah Whitmore, director of the Skyreach Foundation, an organization known for training underrepresented pilots. She stepped forward and extended a folder toward Amelia. "We saw what you did," Sarah said. "Not just the flying, but the grace, the precision, the responsibility. You didn't just prove someone wrong, you reminded all of us what aviation should be about." Amelia opened the folder slowly. Inside a full scholarship to attend Skyreach's Young Aviators program, complete with specialized adaptive training, mentorship, and even housing in Seattle. It was a once-in-a-lifetime offer, and Amelia was speechless. Sarah continued, "We want you to be the first student in our new Accessible Flight Path initiative, a program built specifically to train and certify young pilots with disabilities. And we want you to help shape it." It wasn't just a scholarship. It was an invitation to help design something that had never existed, a new path for dreamers like her. Amelia looked at Franklin, who simply gave her a small, proud nod. But that wasn't the only surprise. Later that evening, back home, her mother, Charlotte, was waiting with a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Word of Amelia's journey had reached the VA, and they were offering funding for her to attend aerospace engineering workshops and an internship with a civilian flight simulation company. In a single day, doors were flying open. Opportunities were being built not just for Amelia, but for every young person who had ever been told, "That's not for people like you." It was overwhelming. That night, Amelia sat alone under the old oak tree behind their trailer, looking up at the stars. It was the same patch of sky she used to stare at when her dream felt impossible. Back then, she was just a disabled girl with a secret dream of flying. Now, she was a pilot in training, a rescue co-pilot, and soon a mentor. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ellie Montgomery, the 8-year-old girl she'd encouraged just days before. It was a voice recording. "Miss Amelia, guess what I told my class? I'm going to be a doctor," and nobody laughed this time. Not even Tommy. Amelia smiled, eyes welling up. That, more than the scholarship, more than the headlines, was what mattered. This wasn't just her story anymore, it was a ripple. A life-changing opportunity had arrived, not just because she had a dream, but because she had refused to let go of it, even when people laughed, especially when they laughed. She didn't need to prove them wrong anymore. She was too busy showing others what was possible. The months that followed were nothing short of extraordinary, not just for Amelia Carter, but for anyone who had ever quietly carried an unrealistic dream. After accepting the Skyreach scholarship, Amelia began traveling every weekend from Willow Glen to Seattle for advanced aviation training. At just 16, she was learning alongside young cadets and aspiring commercial pilots, most of them older, taller, and walking on 2 legs. But none of them had more hours logged in simulators, textbooks, and raw determination than Amelia. Her first flight in a fully adaptive aircraft was one she would never forget. With Franklin Moore watching from the tarmac and a young flight instructor beside her, Amelia eased the throttle forward. The plane rolled down the runway, fast, steady, unstoppable, and lifted off. For the first time, she was in full control. At 3,000 feet, the instructor turned to her and said, "You've got it." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. It wasn't just about flying anymore. It was about finally seeing herself the way she had always believed she could be, not a disabled girl trying to overcome something, but simply a pilot. As her training progressed, so did her voice. She was invited to speak at aviation conferences, school assemblies, and youth centers. Her story, the inspirational journey of a disabled girl who was told she couldn't, resonated far beyond Willow Glen. One of the most powerful moments came at a regional aviation summit in Boise, where Amelia took the stage before an audience of $2,000. She rolled to the center, looked at the crowd, and said, "I don't fly in spite of my disability. I fly because I've learned to adapt. I've learned to focus. I've learned to listen, to observe, and to think ahead. Isn't that what every good pilot needs to do? The crowd rose to their feet. She wasn't just proving them wrong anymore. She was changing how people defined excellence. Back in Willow Glen, the old labels began to fade. People no longer saw her as that girl in the wheelchair. They started referring to her as our Amelia, the girl who flies. One snowy afternoon, while tutoring Ellie Montgomery and 2 other local kids with disabilities, Amelia realized something unexpected. Her dream had grown. It wasn't just about becoming a pilot. It was about opening the sky for others. So she started designing a weekend program, Flight for All, a small, volunteer-run workshop that would teach children with physical challenges the basics of flight, weather science, and navigation. Franklin offered the hangar. The town raised funds. And suddenly, Willow Glen had the first adaptive youth aviation initiative in the region. That winter, Amelia sat under the wing of her training plane, watching Ellie build a paper glider. She was surrounded by laughter, curiosity, and the kind of bold questions Amelia used to ask in secret. And for the first time, she saw it clearly. She had become the person she once needed. She had turned silence into instruction, doubt into direction, and a dismissed dream into a flight path for many. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But through every challenge, every stumble, every moment of fear, Amelia kept her eyes on the sky and her heart steady. Because long before she had wings, she had something far more powerful: conviction. It was a crisp spring morning in Willow Glen when the local airstrip held its first Flight for All Open Sky Day, an event dreamed up by Amelia Carter, now 17, and built from the ground up by a girl once told she'd never belong in a cockpit. Dozens of families gathered under canvas tents beside the runway. Children, many of them using walkers, wheelchairs, or prosthetics, wore goggles and wide smiles as they listened to Amelia describe how an aircraft lifts off. To them, she wasn't a symbol. She was something even rarer, a real pilot who looked like them. Standing in front of a whiteboard with hand-drawn wings and aerodynamic diagrams, Amelia shared something simple yet powerful. They told me I couldn't fly. They laughed. But I studied. I practiced. I stayed ready. And when it mattered most, I flew. Gasps turned into applause. Then, quietly, she wheeled herself toward a group of volunteers preparing a small Cessna 150 modified with hand controls. One by one, she helped young students climb into the co-pilot seat, just for a moment, just long enough to feel what it meant to hold a yoke. Among them was Noah, a 10-year-old boy born with spina bifida who had stopped speaking in class after being bullied. Amelia sat beside him and whispered, "You know what they called me before all this." He shook his head. A disabled girl with a dangerous dream. He blinked. "Do you want to prove them wrong too?" Noah nodded. That day, Amelia didn't just teach kids about planes. She taught them how to take up space in the sky, even if the world had told them to stay grounded. But it wasn't just the children who were transformed. Watching from the sidelines were teachers, veterans, mechanics, and parents, many of whom had once politely dismissed Amelia's aspirations. Now they saw her with new eyes, not as a disabled teen with unusual courage, but as a leader, a trailblazer, a teacher of hope. Reporters were present, but Amelia asked that the focus stay on the students. "This isn't about me," she told them gently. "This is about what's possible when we stop deciding for others what they're capable of." Later that afternoon, Captain Douglas Hayes, now retired and humbled by the journey, approached Amelia with a soft smile. He carried something wrapped in cloth, inside a logbook from his years of active flight duty, with one final blank page left. He handed it to her. "I think you should fill this last page." She opened it and wrote, "Flight Barbara 207, Instructor Franklin Moore, Co-Pilot Amelia Carter, Mission Rescue at Echo Lake Outcome. Lives saved, limits redefined." She signed it quietly. That night, back at home, Amelia sat under the stars, the same stars she had watched as a child, when dreams seemed impossible. Now, they were no longer distant. They were markers, guides, beacons. She whispered to the sky, "I'm not done." And she wasn't. Because once you've flown through fire to save lives, once you've stood in the ashes of doubt and proven everyone wrong, you don't land and walk away. You keep flying so that others may follow. Because the greatest flight of all is helping others take off. Anyone can learn to fly if they're willing to work hard enough and believe smart enough. As the sun dipped low over the Willow Glen airstrip, Amelia Carter opened a fresh page in her flight notebook, not to plan her next lesson, but to sketch out a training program for kids who had once been told no the way she had. This time, they'd hear something different. She knew now the dream she once held in secret wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every child with a disability, every teenager with a big dream in a small town, and every person who had ever been underestimated. The disabled girl who once got laughed at for dreaming of flight had become the pilot who would lift others off the ground. Because for Amelia, and for those who follow the sky, was never the limit. It was only the beginning, the end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep flying with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe dreams are worth fighting for.